Hey guys, it's Boki here from Juki Junkies, and in today's video, I'm gonna help you do machine binding on your computerized machine, because binding doesn't have to be done by hand and it doesn't have to be so scary. And the worst part of the project, it actually ended up being my favorite part of doing projects from this small to this big. So let's get through it. Let me hold your hand and tell you all my tips and tricks to make your binding look as beautiful as this. So let me give you a little outline of today's video. So first, I started by just making a small project that we could tackle here today. I just did a pot holder. So I cut this to be 10 by 10. I did a little simple quilt on it. It says yummy, actually. I love that little fun there. You can have so much fun with quilting projects like this. This is actually a great way to practice free motion quilting and stuff like this. So yeah, I'm just working on a small little project like this. I have some binding, of course. So as far as the sandwich goes here, I have the layer on the top, I have some batting in between, and I have, of course, a layer on the back. So much like a quilt, just on a much smaller scale, quilted it, squared it up, and made it 10 by 10. I have some binding, of course. I'm going to tell you what size I cut my binding as we get started. Just something matching, something that's going to look good with your project. And then I did make a little tab up here. The way I did this tab, instead of like doing a bunch of extra work, I had plenty of binding. I cut like a little, probably like 6 inches or so of the binding, and just folded it in half and then in towards the half again, so I had complete finished edges, and just did that for the tab. So nothing really fancy here. If you have any questions or need any help, feel free to email me down below or ask in the comments and I'll help you. But I just wanted to do something really simple here today. So I'm gonna walk you through how to attach the binding, how to do your corners, what tools I used to do those types of things, finish the binding and what foot I used for that, and of course how to attach the binding. So this little binding method, you almost didn't even see where I attached the binding. This little method is just like a quick version of doing this. I definitely want to do a much more in-depth class on this topic for you guys, but today's video is just a great place to get you started. So let's dive into it. All right, so let's get started on our project. I am working on the HZL-F600 here today because I need a little bit of variety of stitches, and I wanted to share what the binding process looks like on something like a computerized machine. So let's talk about my settings and what I have to get me prepared today. I'm working with some Glide 40 weight thread, a beautiful 100% polyester high sheen finish in the color peach. This is such a pretty color. It's gonna match my project here perfectly. So that's what we have on the top. As far as the needle goes, our needle, we're working with a 9014. Universal needle's fine, quilting needle's fine. I'm just doing some binding. So what I recommend for binding is either quilting or a universal or a top stitch in the size 9014 is perfect. I particularly like the top stitch needles because you can kind of use it for the entirety of the project too, so that's nice. So for today's binding project, I figured I'd tackle just something kind of small. So for our little pot holder, I did make these little straps, so that way we can hang the pot holder around if we want to, of course. So I'm just gonna pre-attach this before we start working on the binding, and how I'm gonna do that is if I kind of can't really sew it in a corner because I need the corner to be freed when I'm actually doing the binding. So I'm gonna just attach it to the side so I still have plenty of room to work on the project, but I'm gonna give myself maybe like a ½ inch from the corner to attach this. So all I'm doing is grabbing the strap, the little hang tag that I made, and I'm gonna start to kind of turn it like this, kind of to make like a U. All right, upside down U. And then I'm just gonna overlap it like this and kind of at like an angle. So you kind of want like a little bit of a mountain peak in there, because if you do it perfectly straight, it kind of hangs a little weird. I like to kind of teeter it just a little bit. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go over to my little corner. I'm gonna go probably more like an inch, honestly. Anywhere between an inch and a ½ inch is good. The more room you give yourself, it's gonna be easier to work in this area when you're doing binding, but the closer you are, it's gonna be harder. So keep that in mind, but if you go too far away, not good either. So I'm just gonna kind of base this in place while we get prepared. So I'm just gonna go over to my sewing machine and I'm just gonna sew really close to that edge. We are gonna be working with a ½ inch, but just to get things ready and going, I'm just gonna sew this right on the edge, just so it's in place. So there's that. We have that all nicely secured, so it'll look something like this. All right. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna start to physically attach our binding. So as far as binding goes, for machine binding, we're gonna be doing this whole process from start to finish on the machine. There's no hand binding, no nothing. So what I like to do is cut my binding at 2 1/4 inch wide. All right, so 2 1/4 inch wide, and then I fold it in half. And if your fabric has a right side or a wrong side, since the solid is the same on back and front, it's kind of hard to show, but if you had a pretty side and a wrong side, you'd want to make sure you're folding the fabric wrong sides together, pretty side is visible facing you, to get the binding all prepped. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to begin to attach the binding on. And if you are working on a project that has a front side or a back side, I like to start by attaching my binding to the back. So I like the top stitch to be on the top of the quilt so you can physically see it. It's decorative. I like seeing the stitch. Now there's no right or wrong way to do this. I've spoken to plenty of people that actually like to do it the other way, where they sew it on the top of the project and then flip it to the back and do the stitching that way. That's certainly an option. It's up to you, but I like to do it from the back to the front. So this little pot holder, I quilted it to say yummy and just did some like fun little lines, nothing too crazy here. So this is the top, so I can actually read it to say yummy. And then I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to do the binding from the back. So I'm just going to start kind of on any side, doesn't really matter. If you're doing this on a quilt, my advice here is to kind of do it on the flat sides. Definitely don't get too close to the corners because that's an awkward place to start, and you definitely want to make sure you have enough binding on the left and the right when we come all the way around to attach the two pieces. So keep that in mind. Definitely don't work too close to the corners. Start somewhere in the middle, and since that's where the two pieces are going to be joined, maybe your joining is not going to look as flawless as the rest. So I always tell people to start your binding in a corner where you don't want your eye to go right away. So like if this side of the quilt's really pretty, maybe start the binding down here so that way you don't run into issues, or your eye, of course, goes to that little spot. So the binding is here. Let's talk about some presser feet changes really quick. So binding is 2 1/4. It's nice and prepped. You have all that you need for your quilt. And I'm going to be working with a 1/4 inch presser foot with a guide. So this is a great foot. It is pretty much an optional accessory for just about every Juki computerized machine, maybe excluding some of the big boys, but this foot is great. It's gonna give me a little guide so I can put my binding right up against it. I can follow along, get that accurate 1/4 inch that I'm looking for this project to be able to flip it around to the other side. So I'm just gonna change out my feet. Now, if you were on the DX7 or even on the F600, you certainly could move your presser foot over to a 1/4 inch. For example, on the DX7 and the DX5, you have a built-in 1/4 inch function where it'll move the needle, and you could certainly use this foot, your standard A foot, and get the job done. Otherwise, you'll just have to move the needle over to your sweet spot, but I like to not have to think about that, and it's really nice because when you put this foot on, it's in the right spot for you. So we're gonna snap on this foot, tuck our thread underneath. And then when we're gonna get started, I'm gonna get started somewhere like in the middle because I wanna give myself plenty of room to join the binding. So here it is. We're just gonna start sewing. I'm gonna start sewing a little bit past the halfway point, and we're gonna get to attaching things all together. Now when I approach a corner, I'm gonna make sure that I give myself about a 1/4 inch from the edge. And I like to do a little back tack stitch here because we are cutting the thread. So we're gonna stop about a 1/4 inch away from the corner. All right, so you're gonna stop, and then once you do that, you can, until you get used to this, it helps maybe to grab a little ruler and make a little mark here so you can see that you're a 1/4 inch away, but 1/4 inch is what you're looking for because it gives you that perfect kind of like mitered cornered look. So once you grab the binding, you're gonna pull it up. You're looking for this little 45-degree angle, so you're gonna turn the binding. Let's do that again. I have it facing me. I'm gonna grab the binding with my right hand. I'm gonna pull it up to create a 45-degree angle, and the binding, I wanted the edge of the binding to meet up with that perfect corner right there. All right, so that's that angle that we're looking for. And then you're gonna bring it back down like this. So you're kind of creating this like little fold like that, all right? I'll do a little close-up of this for you as well. So we're gonna pull up, create that 45-degree, pull it back down, create a fold, and you'll kind of have like this little triangular flap that hangs up, and that's exactly what we're looking for. You don't want it to overhang on the top. You want it basically to lay perfectly with the edge, that corner of your quilt. So once you're confident with your corner, take your time here, but you're gonna start to sew right on top of that little section. Just like this, all the way through. Let's talk about stitch length really quick because I didn't mention that. So as far as stitch length goes, I like to work, I'm actually a little bit longer than I like to be right now, but like I'm very used to sewing on a TL18, so I like to be like right under 2 when I'm doing any sort of reinforcement attachment things. By the way, there's a really helpful video that we have about stitch lengths. It's part of our Sewing Junkies Lab series. I'll link it down in the description for you so you can check that out. But using a good stitch length, a nice tight stitch length, especially here, is important. 2 should be plenty for this type of project because we are gonna stitch it again, and then 1/4 inch all the way through, all right? So we're just gonna zoom through this until we get to the next corner and repeat the same thing that we did. Here I am stopping at the kind of 1/4 inch mark for myself so I can go ahead and create another corner. So again, I'm gonna pull the binding up, create a 45-degree, perfectly matching it up to the corner of that quilt or whatever project you're binding. And then I'm gonna pull it right back down to create my little triangle, just like so. Keep that nice and flat. And then you're just gonna start sewing along this raw edge again. And it's really nice working with this 1/4 inch foot because it's really keeping me straight, it's keeping me level on. If you're somebody that doesn't like to use a guide, I talked about another alternative that you could use, but you could also use the patchwork presser foot. That's a really cool foot too, that allows you to get a 1/4 inch without having to move the needle while following the outside edge of the foot. So we're just gonna sew all the way down again and get to that corner. Stopping a 1/4 inch of the way, doing a little back tack stitch here. It doesn't have to be a long back tack, just a little simple one. And then lifting and doing that little corner again and repeating it until we got one more corner. Now I'm getting close to that little hang tab that I had put in place, so I want to make sure that that's staying nice and flat and tucked away, not out, because if I sew my binding, it's not going to be in the right spot. So make sure that it's tucked towards the middle of your quilt or your project so it's nice and out the way. But last corner here, we're going to go ahead and create that little 45-degree. Bring it back down. And as far as joining our binding, I'm definitely going to have a class again on this topic where we'll go much more advanced in this project, but I am going to show you a little bit of an easier way to attach binding, especially on a project like this where you don't have a lot of wiggle room. But the goal here is not to sew very close to where your starting pieces and your finishing pieces. You want to at least give yourself as much width as you had when you started with your binding. So your binding is 2 1/4, so you want to at least give yourself 2 1/4 here, but I still think that's really close. Totally, there's different ways to attach binding. So for today's method, I'm just going to give myself enough room of my binding, so 2 1/4 inch space. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball that for myself and make it a little bit easier here, but there is a much cleaner finish that I like to do for quilts, but for something like this type of method's going to work just fine too. So I'm just going to stop like at least 2 1/2 inches from where I started to give myself enough playroom to adjust. So as I'm approaching my little stop point here, I am going to do a little back tack stitch just to reinforce that so it doesn't start spreading as I start to join the 2 binding pieces together. So as far as attaching the binding goes, let's trim up our starting piece. So our starting piece is in my left hand. I'm just gonna kind of fold it over to go past where I started. So just like this. There we go. So it's a little bit past where I finished. Okay, so that's good. And then what I'm gonna do, actually I need to cut this a little shorter because we're not doing the method that I'm thinking in my head. Sorry, you guys. So many ways to attach binding. So I'm gonna trim this about to be like kind of where I finish. So not past it because I don't need that much extra. And then this, I'm probably just gonna trim, I don't know, maybe like 1 inch off because I'm gonna tuck this side in. So what we're doing essentially here is I'm gonna go over to my iron and I'm gonna fold this inside like this to create a finished edge. I'm just gonna do a little iron, all right, just like that. And then when I have that nice and ironed, I'm just gonna tuck this little guy in and then we'll have a finished binding that looks something like this. Here's a little better visual of what I just did. I just folded it in about 1/2 inch and just gave it a good little press so that way it's a nice finished edge and not a raw edge, so we can turn this around and actually finish the binding. So the goal here is to have just enough to tuck in. I would say a minimum of 1/2 inch. You don't want to tuck in a lot, and you don't want to tuck in too little, because it's going to be kind of hard to hide the finish, so to speak, and over time you don't want that seam to pop out. Since this is not a very professional way to finish binding, this is a much more quick, expedited way. Great idea for, you know, just saving projects or projects that have a lot of little space here, because the other way to do this is a little tricky when you have a little bit of space to work with. So I'm just going to go ahead and tuck this in, and just like that, it lays perfectly nice. It's very smooth. I haven't tucked in too much. I haven't tucked in too little. There's not like a 1/4 inch here where I'm worried about it poking out. Now that this is really finished, we're just going to go over to our sewing machine and continue this little stitch here from the 1/4 inch where we ended to where we started. And ta-da! You have it all joined right here. It's nice and flat. Now for the fun part, the top stitching of the binding. A lot of people like to do binding by hand. I think RX machines are way too expensive to be doing anything by hand. I think we just need to take some time, learn the machine, and create beautiful stitches with the machine to do a beautiful binding, because I love a good clean machine binding. So now we're going to take all this binding and flip it to the front of the project and do our final top stitch. Now remember, depending on what you like, you might have done this the other way, but I'm doing it from the back, and now I'm flipping the binding to the front of the project and doing it that way. All right, now for the fun part, you're gonna grab some quilt clips. And if you don't have any quilt clips, I would highly recommend them. They are my saving grace for binding. So we're just gonna start on whatever edge, and honestly, if you have a lot of little fuzzies like this, I would go ahead and give your project a trim, because it just gets hard to tuck them in. So if you have a lot of hairs, give it a haircut. All right, so now we're just gonna start to pull the binding from the back to the top, and just folding it over and clipping it as we go. I have a massive pack of quilt clips at home that I use, because even if I'm doing a big quilt, this process will remain the same for me. So I'm just gonna clip all the way around, and I'm gonna show you how I do a corner. So when you start approaching your corner, you definitely wanna clip like pretty close to the edge. Right now I'm probably like 2 inches from the corner. All right, so the way to make sure your corners are nice and beautifully finished is you it's all about a feel, all right? It's about pinching, grabbing, moving, tugging, and making it lay correctly, okay? So that's why that 1/4 inch was really crucial here, so that way we can get a nice crisp mitered corner as much as we could. We're gonna grab the right side of the binding, and I'm going to kind of pinch it and start to create like a triangle here and fold it down. All right, so you might notice that it's a little overlapped, so it's not perfectly aligning, and the way to fix that is just to grab and pinch a little bit more until you finally get it in that perfect spot. So let me show you. You see how that aligns a lot more nicely than when I first pinched it? That's what we're looking for. It's all about pinching and pulling. So let me do it again. I'm grabbing, I'm kind of rolling. You see how my fingers are kind of working like this? I'm kind of rolling and pulling down, so that way the corners actually meet up. And when I'm happy with it, I'm gonna go ahead and clip it, and there you can see that perfectly lies on top of one another. All right, and then I'll go ahead and kind of fill the gaps here. I'll put little clips where I was, just so things stay nice and secure. I know there's a lot of clips going on here, but honestly, the more clips you have, the more consistent everything will stay. So now I've come to that little spot where my binding has been joined, and this area is gonna be a little bit thicker, so keep that in mind. All right, and then we're gonna do one more little section right by this tail. So remember, this is why I said keep that tab away from your corner, because this would be really hard in this corner. So I just like to have it out the way. It makes this little section a little bit smoother, right? I'm gonna pop one more clip over here. All right, so I'm gonna pinch, roll and fold. Oh yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Look at that, looks really good. Maybe put one more clip right here, just to keep me nice and organized. So now we have clipped all the way around, and it looks really, really good. And what I'm probably gonna do for this little tab, so it's not sticking out like this, for the top stitch, I might even just pull this up and top stitch it this way, like over these layers. So then that way it's just kind of like out the way and it's nicely laying. Although this is fine too, like if you stitch right here, this will come up anyways. It doesn't really matter, but I'm probably gonna flip it up just so it stays out the way. It's easier to hang. So now for the fun part, the top stitching part. That's my favorite part. Let's talk about what feet you can use for this portion of the project. A couple options here. Option number one is foot R. Foot R is your edge sewing foot. This foot comes with a lot of the sewing machines. A lot of Juki sewing machines come with these feet, so definitely refer to your manual to see if you already have this foot in your stash. Foot R, your edge sewing foot. This foot is going to help us to align the edge of the binding, and then we can move the needle over to get the perfect seam allowance that we're looking for. While if you've watched any of my videos about binding or the TL feet where we talk about the left compensating foot, I am constantly emailed on a daily basis, do we have the left compensating foot for computerized machines? And unfortunately, there isn't an option like that foot. Different thing. Computerized machines are low shank, the TLs are high shank, they're different type of feet systems. So unfortunately, those feet cannot intermingle, but this foot is going to get kind of like the same results, the same finish, the tool that you need, some sort of edge to guide you to keep you straight. You could totally do your binding with this foot, but there's another foot that's really cool too. This is an optional accessory. This is called the compact edge sewing foot. And I have been asked several times, what is the difference between these two feet? So automatically side by side, you can kind of see that the face of this foot is a little bit more open. That compact edge foot is a little bit more open. The guide isn't as long, okay? And the guide on the inside, right here, also pops in a little bit to where the needle goes down. So that can be a little bit of an issue if you would like to use something like this, you know, with the needle in the center position, right? Because, oops, sorry. Because with this other foot, it doesn't, you know, collide with this open area for the needle to go down. So just keep that in mind. I am going to be using the compact edge sewing foot today because I like that this foot is a little bit more open and that the guide is kind of like in like this. I feel like I can get a better view of where I'm going. But to make, you know, get through a first project or so, you can definitely do this. But I'm going to use the compact edge foot so you guys can see something different here today. So we're going to change out those feet. Just going to snap it on. Very simple. And then as far as starting, a great place to start again is somewhere in the middle. I would not recommend starting on a corner. I would definitely recommend starting somewhere in the middle so that way you can work your way around. And if you are having any flanges or any little pokey things like this, save that for the end. Don't start somewhere like that. Start somewhere in the middle. So I'm just going to start over here. That'll work just fine for this project here today. So when we're getting started, you can butt up your binding to that middle guide right there. Okay, so I'm gonna put the foot down, and that's gonna be my reference guide. It's kind of half off the foot, half on the foot. This part of the foot's feeding the more bulky side. This part is working with the thinner side to kind of keep things all leveled together, right? I like the opening on this foot because I can see everything I'm doing. The beautiful thing about this machine now is that I'm gonna move the needle over to kind of sew at where I need it to. So I'm looking for like 1/8 of an inch, right, from the edge of the foot. So I'm going to move the needle over a little bit, and then to kind of see if I like it, I'm going to put my needle down to test it. Perfect. So you guys have a reference of where I put my needle over. I moved it over to 5.0. I think that's a really good place for me to stitch. That's going to get really, really close. All right, before we get started, you've set your needle to your liking. If you want it a little bit closer, a little bit more to the edge. I like to do 1/8 of an inch because I find that it does a really good job of not catching on the back. So that's another thing to know whenever you're doing machine binding, especially the finishing on a project. Pick whatever color on the top is going to look best on the binding, of course. But then if your back is a different color, you might want to consider, you know, using something that melts a little bit more in. It might be two different colors. It might be the same color. But just keep that in mind because, you know, it might or might not catch on the back. So you just want to make sure, obviously, it's something that you'll be happy with if you see it. Okay? As far as stitch length goes, I'm going to put my stitch length at like, I like a 3.5, but I'm going to do 3.6 on this machine for top stitching. Anywhere between 3 and 4 is going to be nice for top stitching. I think 4 might be a little too long, but if you like to use a decorative thread or maybe something thicker, 4 might look a little better and a little fuller with that type of thread too. So now we're just going to start sewing, the fun part. I love this part. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So we're just going to start sewing, following the binding right on the edge. This foot's going to make it so beautifully easy for us, much like the left compensating foot here. I also like to have something sharp, either like a point turner or a purple thing or something. I just have tweezers close by. So I'm gonna use that to help keep my mitered corner laying exactly where I want it to as I'm approaching that section. And then we're gonna sew a little bit over it, just enough to catch. Because remember, we're doing like 1/8 of an inch, but the goal is to make sure that you're catching it, right? So then I'm gonna pivot and sew all the way down. And if your foot catches on the binding, that's totally can happen. There's a guide there. Just stop. Don't like fight it. Don't try to conquer it. Stop. Lift your foot up and untuck it so that way it's not in the way. We're gonna sew just over that. Actually, I think I sewed a little bit too much, so I'm gonna go back 1 stitch. There we go. All right, to connect those stitches to make sure that they're reinforced, you can either do a lock stitch or you can do a reverse stitch. So I'm gonna do just a little back tack there just to reinforce that little section. And then I'm gonna cut my threads. I'm gonna clean up my little work area here for you guys for the grand reveal. And I'm gonna give myself a little haircut. Oh, I'm so happy with how this turned out. What a fun little project. Now we have a new pot holder for our community kitchen. So look at that. Oh my goodness, this turned out really, really nice. Our corners are really nicely caught. Let's look at the back. Let's take a little peek in the back. So as you can see, it didn't catch on top of the actual peach binding on the back. It caught on the physical fabric, which I kind of like that it doesn't catch on the back because it looks a little bit more finished in my opinion. But that's just my preference. So that can always be adjusted with making your binding smaller, so that way you can catch on both. It's a really hard equation to perfectly figure out because naturally the thickness of your project is also going to control how much you have to fold over and how much is lost in that little transition. But I'm happy with this. I'm not super picky about the back side of the quilt. After all, it is the back. This is something functional that we're going to be using all the time. But that finish on the top looks incredible. So with that foot, it makes it super easy to, you know, butt up your binding against it, much like the left compensating foot on a Juki TL. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I will link that down below for you, because if you have a TL machine, that foot is life-changing for working with quilts, binding projects. It makes binding so easy. And just like that, we've conquered machine binding on our computerized sewing machine. So it doesn't have to be scary, it doesn't have to be hard, you just have to have the right tools. That's all sewing is. That's why there's like a million notions out there, because sewing is really about finding the tools that makes it as convenient as possible for you. So I hope you learned something new today. I hope this makes you want to grow out of maybe some hand binding. I think hand binding is beautiful and it's a great thing to do as you're watching TV or maybe on a long road trip. But if you are in a pickle or if you just want to expedite that process, I think machine binding can be absolutely beautiful, and you can take advantage of your sewing machine because it's more than capable of doing it. You just got to have those right tools. So those couple feet that I talked about here today, that 1/4 inch foot, that compact edge foot, all that's available on JukiJunkies.com for you guys here today. Another thing I want to mention is on my sewing machine, I had my Sew, Clean, and Repeat sticker as well. That's a great sticker that we sell that you can put on the machine and write the last time you cleaned it. It's universal. I know the computerized machines don't really do a lot of oiling, but you can use it on your TLs too and keep track of the last time you oiled the machine. So those are great. Check those out. It'll be in the description below. I also referenced a couple videos here today that are very helpful for you too, talking about stitch length. I think there was one more that I mentioned in there, but they'll be in the description below so you guys can check that out. I appreciate you watching this video today, and I hope you tackle machine binding because it really is fun once you get the hang of it. So give this video a like if you enjoyed today. Subscribe to our channel as we are always posting new content for you guys, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.